introduction. Thank you. Welcome to No Climate Action Without Us, and we're going to be talking about disability and climate change, as it says on the slide. I'm Suzanne from Attitude is Everything. I'm just going to do a quick self-description. I am a white-skinned disabled woman sitting in a wheelchair, middle-aged, and I'm wearing glasses and a green velvet top and red velvet trousers. I'm the founder of Attitude is Everything, and Attitude is Everything brings disabled people and the live event and music industries together, and together we improve access. I'm also Attitude is Everything's environmental champion, and what I've been doing for the last 2 years is leading our program on environmental responsibility, which brings climate change solutions and accessibility together. I'm now going to ask the panel to introduce themselves and say where they're from or what role they've had and what part they've played in the programme that we've been running. Over to you.
Hello everybody, my name's Sarah Pickthall. Just to describe myself, I'm a white-skinned middle-aged woman with blondish hair and glasses, beige and purple glasses. My role within this has been part of roundtable discussions with disabled music creatives, centering their ideas and innovatory practice as part of refreshing and creating some of the resources alongside Attitude is Everything.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Maia. To self-describe, I am a white, plus-size person with ginger hair tied back in a bun, and I'm wearing a black top and a black and white optical illusion skirt. I'm the Artist Engagement Coordinator at Attitude is Everything, and I've been involved with the artist roundtables as well.
Hello everybody, I think I probably introduced myself earlier this morning, but I'm white, 5'8" tall, so quite tall for a woman. I am wearing, I've got shoulder length, you can tell I'm not used to doing this, shoulder length brown hair, I wear glasses, I'm wearing a black top and a cream skirt. I'm co-founder of this conference and director at AGF, and my role with the toolkit was to write the case studies.
Hi, I'm Farah. My pronouns are she, they, and I am a South Asian person with cropped dark hair, white shirt and black trousers. I'm the climate justice lead at Julie's Bicycle. So my role, along with some of my other colleagues, was to help to write the toolkit and to support with the research and some of the recommendations that came out of that.
Brilliant. So just to set some context, our programme was about how to include disabled people in live event sustainability. And when I say disabled people, within that group, deaf people, people who are neurodivergent, and people with long-term health conditions as well. And we did this programme because we could see, or I could see, that disabled voices weren't heard in the sustainability sector. And what we spent year one doing was creating the first version of our toolkit with Julie's Bicycle and A Greener Future. And to do that, Julie's Bicycle ran a public survey to look at disabled people's attitudes on sustainability at live events. And then Teresa added the case studies. We did 3 festival case studies, and we put that together and wrote it up in a toolkit with kind of like the barriers that people might face, but as well as some solutions as well. And so what we've been spending the second year of the programme doing is we wanted to let the live event sector practice with the toolkit and try and implement some of the ideas and creations within it. And the toolkit we've done now, we've updated it to show some of those reflections. But we also realised that the toolkit didn't really reflect the opinions and voices of disabled artists, disabled creators. So Sarah very kindly worked with us along with Hilary, who's at the front, Hilary Juma, Artist Development Manager, and we created some resources through roundtables, live conversations, also a survey to create resources that were dedicated for disabled artists so they could be more sustainable in their practice and their touring. And Sarah also brought to us 2 international case studies, and we'll cover the disabled artists resources in the second half of what we're trying to do. But first of all, I wanted to talk about live event sustainability. And the slide has changed. No climate action without us, how to include disabled people in live event sustainability. So I'm going to have a talk with Farah and Teresa about how we did this. And first of all, as it's the second year of our programme, Farah and Teresa, what were you excited about for year 2?
Shall I? Yeah.
Go for it.
I think, having put the work in, having through the case studies talked to 3 festivals, and certainly last year, it was really interesting to bring the sustainability manager from that festival together with the accessibility manager for the disabled, to have probably the first sort of joint conversation. So that excited me a lot last year. And one thing I always think about research, sometimes it's the most obvious ideas that you never even thought about. And I was certainly in that position last year. I've learned a lot personally. Second year, I think I was really keen with the case study festivals to see how they'd implemented the toolkit, what ways they'd used it, what things in the toolkit perhaps had made a difference that they were able to act on straight away, what things that were things that they couldn't act on straight away or they'd parked just for the moment. And there was lots of interesting stuff that came out of those discussions again this year, which I think we'll touch on in a minute. But for me, overall, it's, as I said, it's sometimes the most obvious that nobody's tackled, and I found that really exciting.
And Farah, to you.
Great. Yeah, I think it was such a great piece of work to be involved with in the first year, and quite often we put out these resources or these guides and then there's no follow-up, so it's really great to be able to see actually how people are using that and what we could improve on as well, and the ways that that it has come together for people. And at Julie's Bicycle we work across the breadth of the arts and culture space, so it's not just about live events and festivals, but it means that we've also been able to take this into other spaces, and it really acts as a template for other areas of improved intersectionality.
Great, thank you. But I think we all 3 of us have to admit that getting the industry to try out the toolkit was quite hard, wasn't it? Why do you think that was?
I think, and it's something I'll also refer to, it's trying to bring 2 sets of people who are involved in, up until now, up until the toolkit, disparate practices that hadn't intersected. So you've got to almost change the mindset as well as looking at the practical issues so that people start to see, the sustainability manager starts to see it from a disability point of view and vice versa. And even though quite a lot of that work in some cases is already taking place, they're already doing it, there are still times where you sort of, and I've been in this for 20 odd years, you lapse into your own mindset, and you have to keep reminding yourself that actually you've got to look at it from another perspective as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that, it takes a little while for people to adjust to that and see things through a different lens.
I think, that thing about it taking time is really important. It's a process, and I think that generally people are much less excited about sharing the process of what you're going through, especially where things haven't worked or where things, could still need a lot more work or need resource or need time or thinking. And it's quite a daunting thing to do, to share what might seem like a failure, but there's so much to learn in those as well. But yeah, I think it does stop people from sort of wanting to share what they're doing sometimes.
Yeah, I would say that the fear of failure and sharing that openly is people are really worried about that, worried about how they might be judged. But it's only through trying things out, failing, sometimes getting a few successes. It's only by being open about that is how we kind of improve, and everybody else learns along with them. But I think that we actually turned it around in the end, because we all certainly presented it in all the spaces that we could. And I went to some meetings with venues and festivals that are signed up to Attitudes Everything's Live Events Access Charter, and they gave some very good feedback, particularly around food and drink at arenas. That was one area that was really good. And then also we had great photos from Alex, who's sitting in the front here. She's our manages our charter, and also another guy that I think some of you might know, Andrew Lansley, who does all the access and stuff and sustainability work at Cheltenham festivals. He also sent some great photos in that were really good examples that people could practice with. We were very lucky to have 3 festivals that put their heads above the parapet in the first toolkit, that said, all right, we'll be the guinea pig for this, and you can test us. So Teresa, they made some demonstrable changes. It was Green Man, Shambhala and Forwards Festival, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And what were some of those changes, and were there what I called any sort of like unexpected benefits?
Yeah, there was some really interesting things that came out of it. Green Man, actually, there was a couple of things. One was to do with water access, and it's quite, it's a very practical thing, but it makes a huge difference. So, from a sustainability lens, you want to conserve water. So the stop tap is your go-to in a way to conserve water, but that stop tap timing is not long enough for people in a wheelchair or have dexterity issues to actually wash their hands or use the water. So what they did was they had a whole range of stop taps on a slightly longer basis, but for the non-disabled areas, they shortened the release of the water, and they just used a simple tie to do that, very practical. But the one that I think was more interesting was a piece of research that was being carried out about waste separation. So one of the challenges from a sustainability, environmental point of view, is cross-contamination of waste. You can have all the signage you like, all the waste bins you like, but how do you get people to put the right waste in the right bin? So they come up with this idea that they actually stapled, big staples, examples of the card and paper, the can, above the bin. I'd never seen that before. I don't know if anybody else has. So you had an actual physical example fastened to the top of the bin, rather than just signage or colour or shape or whatever. And what we realised when we were looking at this was it was brilliant for those people perhaps who had visual issues or other disabilities, because they could then touch. They had the option to touch it, to understand what was meant to go in that bin. So it was a very physical, again, a very simple solution, but I've not seen it anywhere. So I think that was, the purpose was to improve waste separation, try and prevent as much cross-contamination of waste as possible, but actually the unexpected outcome was that it was also brilliant for those people who had particular disabilities to actually be able to touch it, to understand what needed to go into each bin.
Also for people who aren't reading that signage as
can't
well,
read the signage,
who've got learning disability or something else that it's important to get through.
A range of issues.
Yeah. And then if we go back a little bit, Teresa, so what are the particular challenges of being green and accessible that remain for our case study festivals? I know they did really well, but whatever is reflected in these 3 case studies, it's also reflected across the sector as well. Yeah. So what really do you think remains?
So I talked about water and waste, obviously toilets. You know, we're continually having long debates about toilets. You know, we're still trying to, and Forwards Festival example ended up designing their own wheelchair accessible compost toilet because they hardly exist. So that's a big challenge for them. I think in discussions with all three of the festivals, and this is where the toolkit has been quite significant for them, there are supply chain issues.
Yeah.
You just can't get them. The festivals can't get the solutions that they need. So one of the comments was, which really interesting, the toolkit gives them leverage with suppliers to say, it's not just us asking for this. This is a problem across the sector, and here's an opportunity to actually supply a solution. So I think that, you know, that whole supply chain is going to take time, but and festivals are doing their own thing at the moment. But I think the toolkit can make a real difference in terms of suppliers understanding what the issues are, and that it's across the sector. It's not just one festival being awkward and asking for this stuff. So I think that was a big, for me, you know, from what I was seeing, a big outcome. The other thing that, again, you know, we in the sustainability area, we promote, and we're doing it here at GEI, plant-based food, because there's no doubt about it, it lowers your emissions, lowers the impact of your event, and food is served at most events. But what I began to realise when I was speaking to the festivals was actually there are issues around that, because there are, you know, many more people, it seems, who have food intolerances. And I can see this becoming, I talked to a couple of festivals about this, becoming a real issue over the next year or so, but highlighted in the toolkit that we need to think about those people. We can't just say, okay, here's the solution, plant-based food, done and dusted, we've lowered your CO2 emissions. We've got to think more carefully and look more carefully at what sorts of foods we're offering. You know, a lot of plant-based has got nuts in it, for example, but that's not the only sort of intolerance out there. So it's sort of opened almost a can of worms. We've got to do more research to understand what are the best options and, you know, what we can provide for everybody.
It's a really important issue that you raise here, and I think lots of festivals, and there was one case study that said we actually allow people to bring their own food in if that's what they really need, or like pre-order their food so that they don't just get there and realise there's like nothing that they can eat as well. But it also came up for the arenas that said that they felt that they wanted to allow people to bring their own food in if it was much more manageable and easier for them, because it, you know, it's problematic for some reason. Sometimes if you're going for food as a disabled person, you're getting off the viewing platform, or you're getting out of the area where you went, you might lose your place, it takes you ages to get there, or you're separated from your support worker for a long time. It's the same thing about, you know, water points not being on viewing platforms as well. But what the arena said was they really wanted to find a solution where people could bring their own food in, but it was actually really problematic with the promoters, who often dictate what happens at those venues. So that's that you can see that there's quite a big paragraph in the toolkit about how the arenas feel about it. They also said that they wanted to be acknowledged that disabled people were asking them how they could be more sustainable. So some disabled people have kind of bags on the back of their chairs that are like water bags that carry water in, and often you're not allowed to bring your own reusable kind of bottles in because they don't collapse in an emergency. Everything that has to happen in an emergency, you have to collapse the bottle so people can evacuate. And then the next question that got raised was, well, that's a bag. So does that come under our bag policy and searching bags and being bigger bags that arenas don't want you to bring in, or does it come back to the food and drink? So that's the type of thing that they're grappling. with, but I'm really glad that we've made them public in the toolkit, because it's here in the world. It leads to that wider kind of discussion. Okay, so Farah, after talking about some of these big things going on, this is a big question for you. Do you think these challenges are resolvable?
I think we have to find a way to resolve these because disabled people are part of the future that we are building. And so finding ways to shape far more accessible sustainability solutions is what we need to do together. There's no option there. And part of this, even through that discussion that we've just heard about arenas, it's about making those connections, like really thinking about where in the system is this being held up, where are the challenges, where are the blocks, and then what do we need to do together collaboratively to resolve that. Some of it is about, as Teresa mentioned, working with suppliers and approaching suppliers to design those solutions alongside disabled people. Some of it is really just about rethinking our approach, and some of it is about engaging with local authorities, or with thinking about policy and legal sort of regulations in a different way as well, because we can't do any of this. Some of it is held up by the policies around collapsible things, right? So it's about on the ground being flexible with the people who we're engaging with, because not every disability is the same, not everyone will respond to things in the same way. It's as festivals collectively working together to redesign those solutions and to work with suppliers on that. And then on a wider scale, thinking about how do we influence the policy, how do we create the infrastructure for this. One of the things we're doing at Julie's Bicycle is supporting a global campaign, a global piece of work to bring culture into climate policy on the UN level. And you can all sign up to it. And the thing about participating in things in that way is that it means that disability can then be brought into how we think about culture and climate policy as well. Having those examples from the sector is really, really important.
Thanks, Farah. And I was just going to say that there's a real opportunity here for innovation. I would like to see disabled creators and supply makers getting together to create new products, because this is what it really needs, and some funding and some guidance around that. So before time runs away with us, I want to now get on to the disabled creators, how to make your practice accessible and sustainable. And I'm going to have a chat with Maia and Sarah around this. And this is where we're really getting to the heart of that climate justice and disability justice go hand in hand with each other, isn't it? So Sarah and I have known each other and worked together for longer than I really want to admit, but I always have quite a lot of ideas. And Sarah, what was your initial reaction when I contacted you and said, I've had one of my ideas, but I need your help?
Well, let's do it. That was my response, really, Suzanne, because you're so plucky. And within the work that I do in and around disabled leadership, over many years, disabled voices and the innovatory qualities of disabled artists and makers are not within the climate sustainability debate. So what you were suggesting in that sense of no climate justice without us felt really, really important. But also that sense you said to me, and it's just this beautiful sentence, there's no access on a dead planet. And for me, that really changed. So I was very, very motivated by this. So yeah, I wanted to go into this with you. And this phase of the project, and working alongside Hilary from Attitude is Everything, the facilitation of roundtables, felt that we could start to have really meaningful conversations with emerging and established disabled musicians, sort of not just as grateful recipients of the changes that we make, yeah, but innovators in this respect. It's interesting what you were saying earlier, Suzanne, about that sense of shame of what we're not doing well. Well, I think disabled people feel a sense of shame because they have to go first and foremost for their access in order to be represented, to create and make and be on stages, just attending events. That has to be their priority, and quite often they have, as you probably know, an access rider where they broker and negotiate what their access needs are, and hopefully they're met, and quite often they're not. So the doing of that, so often for disabled musicians, it's getting there which is the most stressful. Performing, not so, but it's the getting there. So what was really brilliant about having these spaces with disabled folks together to talk about and suddenly realizing we've got something to offer here. Our voices need to be part of this. But again, some of the things were consistently that access to climate sustainability, information, the language use, it hasn't happened. And so part of this was, if we're together, we can learn from each other's lived experience, different ways of understanding and grasping and making it meaningful. But what was beautiful was, people thinking, actually, I am already doing some things, I'm thinking about this. And I think then we had this conversation about, okay, you have an access rider as a disabled artist, maker, musician. And people have really, powerful intentions around climate sustainability.
Yeah.
Disabled people are disproportionately impacted by this. And so this idea of, what if it was to enrich the conversation that you were having with the event provider? This is what I believe as a disabled person about, these are the movements that I am making individually, and it's hard and it's difficult, but not to apologize for the things that we need in terms of our access.
That's right.
So this is about conversation, rich conversation, putting our hands up and saying, we don't know, we're not sure, but let's find a way to do this together. The start of those conversations, the value of those roundtables, it's still with me. It's really powerful, and I know that Attitude is Everything, and others, I think, will continue to host these conversations for disabled people to work it out for themselves, and then galvanize them to just move into those spaces where the decisions are made, and getting the resources to ensure that they sit at the heart of this moving forward.
I want to ask you about, the access to language, because that came through in the audience-facing toolkit, No Climate, as well as the disabled artists talked about, well, sometimes because of the way sustainability language is presented, jargon-based marketing language, whereas access information is more likely to be like very, very practical and informative. You know of a program, you work with a program in Edinburgh, don't you?
It's a program it's a deaf-led program at the University of Edinburgh, and I just came across it after I'd done the main bit of research. And they're already developing sign language that relates to climate sustainability. And that felt, people are innovating here. They are realizing that language isn't available to deaf communities. So new BSL signs that are coming. So it feels it's not just here, but it's raising that awareness and needing and wanting to be part of this debate, wanting to be represented, just because of the experiences and, as I've said before, the qualities that we as disabled people, we are adapted. We have to. We've adapted to be here. You've adapted to host us, So I think it's rather than being we're waiting for these things to happen for us to be included. We need to be part of the conversation.
Yeah. And just to say that all the information, resources and guidance that surround this programme are actually in a range of accessible formats. So there's a BSL video version, there's an easy read version, there's large print version, there is audio files that you can download, because I wanted really to respond to that disabled people are telling us all throughout both the years of the programme, if we don't understand what to do, how are we meant to do it? and that was really important. I'm going to turn to Maia now as time is ticking on, and I'm going to ask you, what were some of the solutions that disabled artists came up with? And you've got an unexpected benefit to talk about as well, haven't you?
I have, yes. So when you realise that you're being sustainable and accessible by chance is what I took unexpected benefits to mean. One of our roundtable members has a mobility vehicle, and it happened to be electric, and she was really surprised, and she was able to tour in a sustainable way by using an electric vehicle. Other transport solutions were brought up as well, like carpooling, which would relieve anxiety, be a more financially mindful option, and being able to have somebody to support with transporting equipment and instruments. Another thing was tour routing, so touring in a logical way, and adding rest days, which would be accessible and cut down on emissions as well. Another thing that was brought up was communal catering. So one of our roundtable members recalled performing at a festival in Europe, and there was communal catering for artists and crew. This is a sustainable and accessible option because the participant could save energy that they would usually use looking for accessible food beyond or outside a festival site. And lastly, something that was brought up was the accidental outcomes of sustainability, so finding less expensive alternatives that are actually better for the environment. For example, a communal pooling of resources. So this would include things like sharing equipment with friends and buying equipment second-hand or refurbished. On this same vein, one idea that the creators came up with was for events to provide backline, which would be more accessible for disabled creators, taking away them having to carry lots of gear, but also saving on the transport emissions of going to events with lots and lots of gear.
Brilliant. And you wanted to chip in here, didn't you, Teresa, about Bring Me the Horizon?
Yes. I think that just listening to that, it strikes me that, a lot of this work has been going on in these two separate spheres. And so in 2021, we published our Bring Me the Horizon tour, which was then, things have moved on, the most sustainable tour. And we produced a report detailing how we cut the emissions by over a third for that tour. And there are various aspects, but the one that strikes a chord with what Maia's just talked about is the more logical touring route. So we were looking and advising then the artists to not zigzag all over the place and hop from country to country, but create a more logical route for their path. So they immediately had an effect on emissions. But, sharing of assets, we obviously in the sustainability world, we've been talking about that for a long time. Assets between different festivals, assets between festivals or events within the same group. Gosh, there was another one I was going to say, but never mind. I think my point is, and I hadn't really heard the whole of what Maia was going to say before that, it just really strikes me that we have been operating in these two different spheres. And as I said at the beginning, it really excited me to try and bring those two together. But perhaps we need still more cross-fertilisation of ideas to understand what we've already been doing.
Exactly.
Which is what we need to do.
Yeah. And Maia, I'm going to go to you again. Where do we go next? So how is Attitude Is Everything going to support disabled artists to become more sustainable in their practice, to continue this through the Next Stage programme that we run?
Yeah, I think in general, and not just to do with Next Stage, education around this is really important. Like you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of jargon around sustainability that people just don't understand. An example of this inside of Attitude Is Everything was that we had a session in collaboration with our professionals network Beyond the Music with Suzanne to present these findings. Sharing this information and having conversations about what we can do is really important because you don't know what you don't know. So having more roundtables and things like that. Our roundtable participants expressed the need to have more training and more resources. So we have a new climate and sustainability module in our relaunched Live Events Access Charter, which includes guidance for live events on how their events can be more sustainable. And we also have a new environmental responsibility resources page on the Attitude is Everything website, which will be really useful because everything's now all in one place.
Brilliant. So I've just seen we've got 5 minutes left, so that's not very good time management on my part there, but can we move quickly to the international case studies if we can? We really need to talk about Slow Label. Could you change the slide of this is an orchestra in Japan made up of disabled and non-disabled people. So let's talk about Slow Label and then a little bit about camp.
I mean, this is really interesting. So a disabled creative leader, Chris Yoshie, who started Slow Label as part of the lead up to their Paralympic cultural eventing, and very much the principle of that was around representation, access and inclusion for disabled people. We're finding that yes, you have these moments where that you're making a point there, but actually in terms of the inclusive disaster risk reduction, disabled people and their supporters and carers were nowhere, and in Japan we know there are a lot of earthquakes and flooding that happens. So in terms of sort of raising awareness of this, they shifted their thinking to this beautiful project, Earth Pieces, which can be replicable globally. So they're looking to tour it, but they're just looking at how they educate and inform about climate sustainability, the principles of that, but also disability and access, working with a number of collaborative partners, staging these beautiful events, and constantly just looking at how they might use some of the products, how they might create instruments from lost and found in, materials. So it's really such a beautiful example of doing something sort of society-wide. I think it's going to make more impact for them, but raising awareness, what is happening and not happening for disabled communities in Japan today. And then there's another, which is this camp, which again is very much based Lucas Hornby from his own lived experiences and need to decompress, look after himself around the quality of what he was creating with the local community near Toulouse, and sharing of the music experiences that they were doing with local communities, 3D printing, plans for composting, but everyone taking responsibility. So it's beautiful sort of holistic approach to everything that very much comes from him and his ways and needs of being and doing in the world as a professional music creative.
Brilliant. Now look, I haven't left any time for questions, but we are all going to be around until 5:30 at least. So please come up and kind of ask us. I'm sorry about that. I just want to say in the summing up, it's important that leave no one behind. Disabled people in the plan from the start. Retrofitting really doesn't work. It's a collective and shared responsibility that involves all of us. Our sustainability programme continues. It's now incorporated into our Live Events Access Charter, and the venues and festivals that sign up to it will be expected to feedback progress on being green and accessible. And to the serious points, there is no climate justice without disability justice. If we think back to Slow Label, raising awareness that the Japanese society has to wake up to the inclusive disaster risk reduction, we take that into the LA fires, and the example, I'm sure you all know that 3 disabled people died in those fires waiting to be evacuated, and anecdotally I know of a disabled person that lost their accessible house, their home and all their equipment in it. So that's why Attitude is Everything's programme is so vital. Thank you, panel. Thank you so much.